I'm now going to turn this over to Alan, who's joined us. Alan is the, as I mentioned, is the head of AI and Cloud Labs for HCLtech. Alan, could you perhaps tell us a little bit about HCL and what you do there to kick this off?
Yeah, hi, and good morning, Tim, right? And you asked me for a quick overview of HCLtech. I'll make it brief, right? So HCLtech is the global market leader in technology, engineering, and IT services. What does that really mean? We're a company of over 225,000 engineers and technologists who design, build, and operate the world's most complex technology solutions. Pleased to join you today, Tim.
Yeah, so maybe just us a little bit about some of the kinds of use cases that you have seen. And particularly, I think it'd be very interesting if you could talk about, okay, well, here's the range of pilots, and then here are the things that once piloted, everybody goes, oh yeah, we gotta put that into production because it's really working. And so that you know, because I think we have this mix of we have to be willing to try and fail and then figure out what works and then do more of that.
Changed in the last 18 months, right? And we often joke ChatGPT is the best sales tool this industry has ever invented, right? I mean, it's opened so many new discussions and sort of avenues, you know, within organizations large and small. I mean, really what we've seen, Tim, is 18 months ago, a year ago even, everyone was exploring, right? Typically pursuing what we would call horizontal use cases. I mean, what we see today is a lot more confidence, right? We see clients, large organizations, really make some kind of quite strategic decisions about where they expect Gen AI to bring impact. Seen this shift from horizontal exploration to very vertical business-specific applications. We see this across all industries. This is the remarkable thing. The expected industries like financial services, we see it in manufacturing, we see it in healthcare, we see it in energy and utilities, we see it in oil exploration. It hasn't really been impacted, Tim. I think that's what I find most remarkable. It's a good of the confident good one, or the technologist, Tim. This is senior business leaders, so they're now driving this journey.
So can you kind of tell us a little bit about some of the particular use cases that have been most impactful?
Well, I think, you know, Tim, when I think about use cases, and you made this point earlier, right? We tend to find that those domains where human mental capacity is limited or easily overwhelmed seem to be the current sweet spot for successful production journeys with Gen AI. A good example that I'll share with you, Tim, and we've got plenty of examples in HCLtech, is within the environment of a stock exchange. If anyone's ever worked within a stock exchange or the tech environment within a stock exchange, they are incredibly complicated environments. And when things go wrong, it gets expensive very, very quickly indeed. So we've applied Gen AI into one of the world's largest stock exchanges. And this is how we use it. It's quite unusual. One of the problems with IT is that we struggle sometimes to fix things as quickly as our clients would expect. And a particular problem that we have is in the environment of a stock exchange, Tim, IT incidents are generated all the time. Thousands upon thousands of things are kind of notified across IT in any working day. This particular problem in a stock exchange is that when the more serious problems occur, humans are not resolving them as quickly as we would like. This particular use case is where we have used OpenAI to read every single contract between IT and the business. We don't just read every contract between IT and the business, but in real time, as incidents arise within the technology estate, we go and find the contractual obligation that dictates how that incident should be resolved. We understand the financial penalties that might occur if we don't resolve the incident quickly. And we use Gen AI not just to read the contract, but we match up the IT incident with a contractual clause that defines how it should be treated. We then reprioritize the incident to ensure that the more financially painful issues are resolved more quickly. And then we use Gen AI to find the ideal human to divert the ticket to ensure that it is resolved within the contractual guidelines. That's an example, Tim, of where we're using Gen AI in those environments where human mental capacity is severely limited. No one ever reads the contracts between IT and the business, and even if they did, they can't read them quickly enough.
And they also can't find the conflicts between different contracts or the, So let me ask you a different question that's related to this one. In a deployment like that, you are dealing with a lot of sensitive legal information. And how do you make sure that, so I understand that there's an issue, obviously a lot of people are concerned about having their proprietary data, given to another provider like OpenAI. There are protections on the API, in terms of that they won't train on data that's given to developers through the API, but that's not true in the web chat interface and their apps. How do you navigate that and make sure that your people are not actually leaking confidential information to OpenAI?
It's a good question, Tim, and I would say that this particular theme around, let's call it IP leakage sensitivity, it was a very dominant conversation a year ago, but a lot's happened in the last year. In particular, vendors like OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, and others have done a really good job to prove from a product perspective that a lot of these concerns are not as worrisome as we might think. But you do make another good point, which is really around how do we ensure that people exhibit good behavior? Because it's still possible to do some really stupid stuff, Tim, right? You can do some really stupid stuff that puts people, or rather information, at risk. So, there are a number of governance and sort of, guardrail issues here that clearly I think most people are probably familiar with. But from our perspective, a large part of our mission to weave Gen AI into our entire business, and you appreciate a company of our size, over 200,000 engineers now need to become competent in the production use of Gen AI. We have something we call the Gen AI Academy within HCLtech. We use it, of course, to ensure that everyone has got, the very latest skills. But part of the mission of our academy, Tim, is not just to teach the academy, is not just to teach the technology, but to ensure that people are aware of some of the good behaviors we expect as well.
Yeah. So let me move on to some of the other sample projects you mentioned. You have some that are user facing. For example, there was one that was insurance policy comparison, via chat for consumers.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good example, Tim, right, of, again, where we use AI, Gen AI in particular, to overcome complexity. All right. The example you've just given, right, is in the domain of an insurance company. And one thing I like to, when I consider kind of valuable use cases, if there's ever a scenario, Tim, where what I would call the customer experience is a challenging one, and a good example is there's certain things that all of us hate doing, right? I hate renewing my mobile phone contract because I have to speak to a human, right? It's sometimes a little bit painful. Likewise, if I ever need to renew my car insurance, my auto insurance, my home insurance, sometimes that's not a great experience. It's not something I enjoy doing. And what we've done in the example that you just given is we've used Gen AI to enrich the dialogue between the customer and what I would call the sales rep for an insurance company. Again, we've used Gen AI to read every single policy that this company has ever issued. We know what policy you've got. We know what policy other people have got. And when you contact this particular organization, maybe with a query in terms of, I've just renewed my car, my auto, have I got the right policy cover? Or I've just moved home, have I got the right policy cover? Well, we use Gen AI to enrich the knowledge of the sales representative. We use Gen AI to ensure that they give good advice to their client.
Yeah.
And most importantly, because we've read every single policy this company has ever issued, we can immediately make good recommendations. So it's all about using Gen AI to enrich the customer experience.
I think that this is such an important use case. I remember years ago, the CEO of Fidelity was telling me how this is back in the days of some overhyped AI technology. She was begging IBM to help them with customer service because there's so many complex policies. And of course, the question is, could we use AI to actually simplify those policies would be another whole question. Not just explain the complexity, but go, wait, this is unnecessarily complex. But let's we'll come back to these case studies because there's a lot of great questions here in the Q&A. So why don't we take a couple of these? Rayan Fargo asks, when you depend on Gen AI in such a high stakes industry as the stock exchange and financial tech, how do you deal with hallucination issues?
Yeah, well, of course, there's a lot of work taking place around fine-tuning models, Tim, to kind of just make them a little bit more or safer, if you like, in certain domain environments. And I would pick up another trend, Tim, which we're seeing, and that is around a lot of organizations now want to control, they want to own the Gen AI stack. They see this combination of their data with an LLM as a strategic asset, right? And they're prepared to invest in that asset. And a really good kind of related theme, Tim, which I'm sure is close to your heart, is this kind of growing emergence of open source Gen AI. We see a lot of traction, a lot of interest around open source models like Llama from Meta. Of course, that within your own business, O'Reilly Answers now is based on Llama 3, I believe, Tim. That's and it's another really good example of where clients are taking an open source model, they're fine-tuning it to get it down to the size and accuracy that they expect, and then they want complete control over the environment in which that runs. You might prefer to run it in your data center because that's where your data might reside, but equally, you might want the freedom to run that in a cloud environment. And this kind of maybe adoption of these kind of more open, easily tuned models is driving a lot of that choice as well.
Yeah, let me just take this opportunity to answer another question. DK actually asked me a question. How are we making sure that our AI engines don't churn out nonsensical information? And I think the answer is basically you have to think about AI as a pipeline. And in some sense, there's this question part of it, and then there's the answer part of it, and they can be different processes. We sort of think it's just one magic black box, but it isn't. So effectively, what we're doing is we are understand. First of all, we're not just using a model that's trained just on, because we're able to use this internally with Llama. We're able to train on our own vetted content. We're able to preference that content in the pipeline of output. We're able to, and we're really trying to identify. We also do this for payment reasons, so we can pay our authors. Go, okay, where did this answer come from? And so it's much easier when you have a constrained environment that you control, and because the models that have input everything have input a lot of nonsense, and then they try to put in guardrails, and in some sense, if you can use one example I kind of give in theory is like, you could imagine you want to be trained on Reddit so that you will understand what somebody is asking about some legal issue. But then you want your advice from a lawyer, from legal documents, not from Reddit. And so, you kind of like there's some interesting asymmetries there that we're kind of exploiting at O'Reilly, where we want it to be able to understand any question, but then we want to go to our vetted sources of answers. So Ankur Kumar says, on the extreme end, do we need to train humans in programming when AI can code? What's your view?
Oh, this is a good one, I think, Tim. I think that's a really good but topical, question. We've within HCLtech, right? We I think you mentioned earlier, we've got a very large software business, one of the world's 15th largest software companies, HCL Software, and we have enthusiastically adopted Gen AI across that entire business. So our entire product engineering capability is now powered by Gen AI, and we've had the luxury of analyzing the impact and productivity across the entire business. So we look at each individual role, we look at the age of the individual, we look at the seniority, years of experience, programming languages, and so on. And we've got a really good for the overall impact that Gen AI kind of brings to the domain of software engineering. It's probably the lowest hanging fruit of all. It's the one thing that everyone seems to address first. And in our own business, we're recording about a 40% improvement in what I would call release velocity, or rather release capacity. We can bring product features to market 40% quicker than we could before. So it's quite an incredible and dramatic improvement for us. And we see a similar thing, Tim, across the entire industry. Now, one of the challenges, and this is what the question relates to, right, is for many people, the use of Gen AI may be limited to the use of copilots. GitHub Copilot is a good example, right? And one of the observations I will make is it's very similar to what I call the sat-nav problem, Tim, right? In terms of the more experienced engineers are really good at knowing what good code looks like. They're really good at having a dialogue with a copilot and either refusing or asking it to refine the suggestions that it makes. Sometimes less experienced developers, and this is the sat-nav problem, less experienced developers will just take whatever. It's not necessarily the best recommendation. But why do we call it a sat-nav problem? I don't know about you, Tim, but where I live, every other week there's a news story about a truck or a trucker getting their vehicle wedged along a narrow street or between two buildings, and you ask yourself, why on earth did you do it? Why did you take that particular turn? Everyone knows that your truck won't fit down that road, but of course the driver was just blindly following sat-nav. And we have the same issue, I think, with some of these co-pilot technologies in software engineering. It does need a bit of human insight before you too easily accept some of these recommendations.
Yeah, I remember in the early days of Copilot sitting down with Nat Friedman, who at the time was the CEO of GitHub and longtime friend and open source programmer. And he's sort of flipping through various, examples. Goes, that's clearly wrong. That's clearly wrong. Oh, that one's good. Yeah, exactly. You need to be able to know a lot to use these things effectively. But that being said, I think that's true everywhere. It's like if you're not a good writer, if you're a good writer, you can use AI to make you better. If you're a bad writer, it will also make you better, but maybe not as much. And so the skill sets are going to be, I think there's another point that I tried to make earlier in my talk, which is that there's going to be because we'll be able to do so much more, there will be new jobs that we didn't even imagine. Just think about how the web, the first web pages were just static pages, and HTML, anybody could read it. You just go to somebody other page or you copy it and make a few modifications, bang, it's done. And now you think about, oh my God, there's DevOps engineers, there's front-end developers, back-end developers, massive numbers of programming frameworks. And same thing's already happening with AI. We have vector databases and RAG pipelines, and the technology infrastructure of this stuff is going to keep changing, and people will need to know about that. So there'll be new kind of tech adjacencies that will require massive upskilling. Yeah.
Hey Tim, I certainly agree. And as you made earlier, this is really about augmentation, right? This is about augmenting our kind of productivity, quality, and sort of speed as humans, right? And I certainly agree. Lots of new jobs are going to be created. Lots of new businesses, Tim, will emerge as a consequence of the ease of which we can now all create things. But even within the realm of kind of IT, where I suspect sort of many of your kind of subscribers exist today, we are already seeing new roles emerge in abundance within IT. A good example of that, Tim, would be in the realm of IT operations. Now, if anyone's ever worked in IT, IT operations is quite a static environment. We typically sign these contracts called SLAs that define the sort of behavior of an application or a system for many years. As we move into a world where all of our applications and solutions are going to ride or sit on top of an AI sort of fabric, well, that AI fabric, that AI platform changes daily. Think about the emergence of more accurate models. Think about a lot of the governance issues around Gen AI in particular. Well, IT is becoming a far more organic environment, Tim, now that Gen AI has turned up. And by that, I mean, it's not just about running a static platform. Someone's got to decide when to enhance it and how to enhance it in real time. Think about, for example, switching out one model for an alternative that might be more accurate or suffer from less hallucination. Someone has got to make those quite meaty, chunky decisions on behalf of the organization and then implement them. And it's an example, I think, of many, many new roles that are already starting to emerge.
We're running out of time, but there's so many questions. I want to try to squeeze in one more, particularly since I ran a little long and you started a little late as a result. And this is from Krishna Sai. How is HCLtech navigating challenges related to copyright, copyleft, related to code generation? We recognize the productivity improvements, but what's the latest thinking on this issue?
Yeah, and it's I think it's probably an issue, right, that would be contemplated by every organization, Tim, right? And I think, a lot of the issues around copyright, for example, kind of originated again in the realm of software engineering. There was a lot of concern, as you're probably aware, in the earlier days of this journey, in terms of what source code had been used, for example, to train models. Really good example, right? But I think it's been proven that as you look at some of the more kind of mature services, that problem's largely been overcome because the training kind of code base is a little bit more, I guess, selective. I would also say, because the question really was about HCLtech, we announced a few weeks ago something called AI Force. And what is this? In simplicity, we've moved to an AI-led posture when it comes to engineering across our entire company. AI Force is HCLtech's approach to really using AI to drive the complete product and software engineering lifecycle. And it goes well beyond kind of coding co-pilots. But what I will say, Tim, is we train our own models, right? We train our own models on our own code base, right? So we have complete control, not just on the model, but of course on the style and behavior that it exhibits as we use it to create software within our own business too. So I think in summary, Tim, all right, it's a well, I think, covered topic. A lot of the vendors now have made it a lot easier for some of these concerns to be overcome. And as we said earlier, I think looking at some of the open source models, IBM is a really good example of a provider of really good open source models that address software engineering concerns in particular. Yeah. I think the industry has largely worked its way around this concern.
All right, well, listen, with that, I think we're going to have to quit. But thank you so much, Alan. I love hearing from you and what you've learned, and I wish we could go on, but we have to move on to the next presentation. Thank you so much for joining us from all the way from Cornwall.
Thanks, Tim.